name is Dan Shappir, and we're going to play a game. I'm going to test your knowledge of JavaScript. Hopefully this will be as fun for you as it is for me. But before we get into the fun part, I want to talk a little bit about the profit part. Anybody who's ever used JavaScript knows that JavaScript has its fair share of, let's call it, strange or unexpected aspects. And when and especially for those coming from, let's call them more pedestrian or mundane programming languages, whenever I run into such an interesting aspect, I take the time to study and understand it. And because that can be repetitive and time-consuming, I try to make it fun by trying to turn it into a riddle. And when I'm successful, I actually tweet it. And it turns out that by doing so, I don't only make it fun for myself, but I make it fun for other people as well, because it turns out that quite a lot of people interact with these riddles that I publish on Twitter, and sometimes even hundreds of interactions. So in doing this, I learn JavaScript, I make it fun for myself, and I also help other people enjoy the process of improving their JavaScript knowledge. Okay then, let's start with the game. But one more thing before that, let's talk a little bit about the rules for this game. So first and foremost, your interaction with me, your input is a must. This is going to be a highly interactive game. I'm going to ask you the riddles. I'm going to expect you to provide the answers. Next thing is that if you happen to already know the answer to one of these riddles, because, I don't know, you follow me on Twitter, and shame on you if you don't, then please stay out of that particular riddle and give somebody else a chance to actually think about it and solve it. Another thing is don't use console or node. This would be cheating. I'm going to ask you some questions about even JavaScript syntax, and if you just type it in, you'll see what comes out. So, you can test me afterwards, but don't do this during this game. And finally, don't shout out the answer. I want to give everybody a chance to think about the riddles, try to figure it out on themselves. Just raise your hand. Tal and I will try to figure out who's the first to raise their hand, and based on that, we can hopefully decide who the winners are. Unfortunately, I didn't have time to prepare prizes, so it's only about, I don't know, bragging rights or whatever. Okay, that being said, let's start with the actual game. So I want to start out with a relatively easy one. I was also looking for a picture. I was doing a Google image search for easy one, but all the images that came up were not really appropriate for a conference. So no picture for this easy one question. We all know that a period is valid in JavaScript. It could be either the property operator, to accessing a property on an object, or it can be simply at the decimal point. Like in this example, we see both these examples. We see the decimal point here and the property operator here. With JavaScript ES6, 3 consecutive periods or dots are also legal. It's the spread operator. The riddle then is, are exactly 2 consecutive periods ever allowed? And if so, when are they used? Are they valid? And if they're valid, when are they used? I'll give you a minute or two. Think about it. You know JavaScript. This is JavaScript syntax. Any takers?
I know the answer.
Sorry?
I know the answer.
Oh, you know the answer. Then butt out if you know the answer.
Can we ask?
No, you can ask questions. Yes, please, Tomer. Please ask the question.
Are Unicode identifiers allowed in JavaScript?
Okay, I'll modify the riddle. 2 consecutive dots in a string, in a regular expression, or anything like that are excluded from this riddle. I'm asking about specific syntax in the language. Okay, then, because we don't have much time, I'll actually provide the answer. So the answer is yes, it is in fact allowed. And to understand why and when it is allowed, it's important to understand that in JavaScript, every entity is an object, even numeric literals. I'm always somewhat amused when people tell me, well, JavaScript isn't really object-oriented because it doesn't have interfaces, it doesn't have classes. Well, now it kind of has classes, but it doesn't have all this stuff. And I say JavaScript is actually more object-oriented because all these entities that you just mentioned are not, in fact, objects. Whereas in JavaScript, every entity is an object. How can you get even more object-oriented than that? And as I said, even numeric literals are objects. Now, what does it mean that they are objects? It means that you can invoke methods and access properties on numeric literals. But here's the problem. We already said that the dot can be both the property access operator and also the decimal point operator. So if I try to write 1.toString, the JavaScript will barf because T is not a decimal, and it expects the dot to be a decimal point. So because it's already used for both, we disambiguate it by writing it as 2 consecutive dot operators. This is actual legal JavaScript, and this will return the string 42. It's kind of, you can think of it as a shorthand notation for 42.0.2 string. So, okay? Any questions or comments about that? Okay. Well, okay, moving on to the next JavaScript riddle. Anybody who's ever interviewed for any position in any software company, I think, has been asked at least one question about palindromes. For those of you who don't remember, palindromes are things that can be read the same way from both directions. So in this simple example, race car is a palindrome. It can be read right to left, left to right, comes out exactly the same thing. So let's look at a JavaScript syntactical palindrome, or potential JavaScript syntactical palindrome. Let's say that x is an already existing variable, and I'm assigning this thing into x. This is a palindrome because you can see it reads exactly the same way, right to left, left to right. The riddle is this valid JavaScript? And if so, what would be the value of x? See, I'm asking hard riddles here. I see that you raise your hand. I'm going to give everybody another bit of a chance to think about it. You also raise your hand, so if he fails, I'll give it to you. Okay, you raise your hand first. Do you have an answer? Sorry, I can't hear you. Can you speak? You don't think it's valid?
No, because you can only have strings or numbers that's neither.
What do you think? Do you think it's valid or not? Well, I'm talking JavaScript. ES6 is totally standard, so ES6 definitely goes. If I start throwing ES7 stuff out there, that's debatable. But ES6 is just as good as ES5 in terms of being standard. Okay, I don't know which one of you raised your hand first. Sorry? The one in the back? I think, yeah, you did. Okay, we've got the right answer. Good on you. Everybody clap. And I'll explain the answer right now.
Aren't you missing a bar?
No, I said that x is already a defined variable. It's going to be... Shut up, you. Okay, so yes, it is in fact valid. And here's an explanation. It's ES6 code, and let me give a quick explanation. So we see it up here. What does it actually mean? So one of the nice features in ES6 is that it actually allows you to define variables but calculating the names of the properties. So by actually putting square brackets on the left side of the colon, you can actually have an expression that results in a value, and that value is then used as the property name. And it's cast into a string because property names in JavaScript are always strings. So here's an example. It will be an object with a property name called meaning of life and the value 42. What we had before inside the square bracket is an empty object. Empty object in JavaScript, like anything else, can be cast into strings. And in this case, it's cast into the string object, this string up there. So ultimately, what we end up is with an object that has a property called object, and on the right-hand side, it has the value of an array containing an empty object. Okay? So yes, it is valid JavaScript syntax. As a bonus riddles, not to be answered here, to take home with you, here are a couple of almost palindromes that you can think about what they actually mean. Is this valid JavaScript? It's almost a palindrome. You can see that the part on the right and the left are actually, the parentheses are switched. And how about this one? Again, almost a palindrome. Here it's actually the assignment is part of the whole thing. On the right-hand side, though, we have two equals instead of a single one. Is that legal or not? Okay, so not for now. This is for you to take home with you. Almost palindromes. This is actually one that I like a lot. I actually did not come up with this riddle. It's one that I got from somebody else. That's another nice thing about Twitter. You can start sharing stuff. And this one is actually useful, I think. Given three variables, target, val, and def, I want you to provide me with the shortest expression that assigns the val into target, but if val has the value undefined, it assigns def instead. In other words, what I want is the equivalent of this expression, but a much shorter one. Now, if you're going to be proposing this, then I'm going to reject it because this is not good enough. Why is this not good enough? Yeah, because it's not good enough because if val is any falsy value, it will go to def, which means that if val is, for example, 0 or empty string, it will go to def, which is not what I want. I want to go to def only if val is undefined. So, can you think of the shortest possible expression for achieving what is written above? And again, target, val, and def are all defined variables. That's why I'm foregoing stuff like var and const or let or whatever. Okay, I'll give you a minute or two. You have an answer? Just a minute. I'll give you. Anybody else is thinking that they're kind of getting close? Otherwise, I'll. Sorry? Everything is defined. Yeah, but it might define with the value undefined.
No, I mean, if the target is an existing variable.
No, all the variables. Okay, the question was, are all the variables existing? Yes. For the sake of this discussion, all the variables are existing, but it might be existing with the value undefined. It might have been an existing variable that was never initialized, for example. So you have a solution. Let's start. Okay, do you have the solution? You were the first to raise your hand. Sorry, can please speak up. Yeah, but how would that be an expression? I really need, I want something that's equivalent to this. I want an expression that when you execute it, target will be set to val, but if val is undefined, target will be set to def. I want an expression that's an equivalent to the expression written up here, this one. Yes, you raise your hand, please.
I think we should use the weight and arrow function with default parameter as def. So
Okay, I understand your suggestion. The suggestion was, for those who didn't hear it, to use an arrow function and to use it with a default parameter. That's almost the answer that I'm looking for. Let me give you the solution then. It's, in fact, is built on destructuring, and an important point to understand is that destructuring is not actually limited to function arguments. You can actually apply destructuring in any assignment to a variable. That's something a lot of JavaScript developers coming to ES6 don't actually understand. Moreover, you can actually use default parameters, default values in any assignment, not just in arguments. So people tend to think about default argument values, but in fact, with destructuring, you can have default for any assignment. So it actually comes out looking like this. So destructuring, for those who don't know, here I'm assigning of the array that contains the value 1, 2, 3 into 3 variables, A, B, and C. So A gets assigned 1, B gets assigned 2, and C gets assigned 3. There are more complicated scenarios with the spread operator. I'm not going to go into that. but that's the crux of destructuring. Destructuring, as I said, also supports default values, not just in argument to functions, but in general assignment. So for example, in this case, I'm destructuring the property answer out of the object meaning of life, but if meaning of life does not actually have a property called answer, or if it does, but its value is undefined, answer, the variable answer gets assigned the value 42, which ultimately gives us the solution when I combine these two aspects, and this is the expression. Let's think about it a little bit, what's going on here. I put value inside an array, and I then destructure it into another array. So target gets the value val. But if val is undefined, then target gets the default value. So this is the shortest expression that achieves the equivalent of what we saw before with the 10-array expression. Now write that in your code and see how much your coworkers love you. But it does work. Okay. The bonus question, again, not for now, but for later on, what happens if val is null rather than undefined? And what does that mean for the future of null in JavaScript? Okay, I actually really like this one. So I don't have much time, I'm guessing, but I don't care. I'm just going to talk until they throw me off the stage. Okay, so in JavaScript ES6, there are now two ways to define a function. We can use the old function keyword, which used to be, for me, the most common keyword, occurring keyword in programs that I've written. And now we've got the new arrow syntax, which means that in many ways, function is kind of becoming defunct. So these are kind of almost equivalent ways of creating a function and assigning that function into f, or reference to that function into f, which is why I called it two peas in a pod, because it's two ways to create functions, as it were. But it's not exactly the same thing. And because it's not exactly the same thing, here's my riddle. Assuming you have f, how can you tell if f, the function that f references, was created using the old way, function, or the new way, arrow? Well, yeah, but that's only if I actually call the function. And then I would need to somehow crash the function. No, how can I, it's not my function, and I don't necessarily even want to call it. And if I called it, how would I know if it has this inside or not? Inject some code into that function? That would be kind of terrible. So my question is, given the reference, is there any way for me to tell whether or not it was created using function or using arrow? You raise your hand, you I think after, and then you too. So let's start with you. One suggestion, toString. It can work, but it's disgusting, and I won't accept it. And the reason that aside from the fact that it's really disgusting, it's particularly disgusting because it can be actually very difficult to implement. Because I can have an arrow inside a function, I can have a function inside the arrow, and ultimately I would need to come up with a relatively complicated test based on toString in order to be able to determine which is which. So yes, it's doable, but I'm looking for a nicer answer. Yes, you have, unless it's toString.
Would it be something like this dot f dot this is different from this?
This dot, no.
Because it'll have a different content.
Yeah, but first of all, this dot f is not on this, and I can't access this inside of f, so no.
They probably have different prototypes, and probably the arrow function even goes.
That's the answer. Okay, you're the winner. Okay, you guys are both the winners. So here's the answer. The answer is this. So as I said, toString can be made to work, but it's so ugly. So let's skip that. And the hint that was already, is the way to think about it this way. Arrow functions cannot be used as constructors. And the reason that they cannot be used in JavaScript, for those of you who remember, any function can effectively be a constructor. But arrow functions cannot. Why? Because they don't, in fact, have this. And so it doesn't make any sense for an arrow function to be a constructor if it doesn't have a this, that it, the whole point of constructors is they initialize their object. As a result, because they cannot be constructors, there's no point in them having a prototype. So the way to check really, and you can actually check this, if I create just an empty object like this, it has a prototype value, property. But if I use an arrow, it does not actually have a prototype value. So the easiest way to check if f is a reference to function or to an arrow is just to check whether or not it has a prototype value. Okay, I actually had more riddles, but I'm running out of time, so I'll just conclude. And I'll say the following in a bit. Whenever we talk about, we interview people or you see ads for developers, they search for software ninja, for JavaScript ninja, rockstar, whatever, and we all want to be the ninja because we all want to be a ninja. It's really cool to be a ninja. But what kind of a ninja do we want to be? Do we want to be this kind of a real, dangerous ninja, or do we want to be a toy ninja? And for me, the big difference between being one or the other is by how well we understand and know and can leverage the power of the tools that we use, and how do we continuously develop ourselves or improve ourselves as developers. When we encounter something that we don't know or we're not familiar with or we don't understand, do we put in the time and effort to learn it and to understand it, or do we just ignore it and go with what we know? Now, for me, the answer is obvious. You have to continuously improve and enhance yourself as a developer, and that means that as tools improve, as languages evolve, as paradigms change, as new technologies emerge, we have to be able to invest the time and effort and to improve ourselves. And for me, the way to do that and to be able to continue to do that is to make the process fun. And for me, building riddles or creating riddles or answering riddles makes the process more fun. For you, pick your poison. But hopefully you enjoyed these riddles. I've got more of them. If you want to see more riddles that I've created, you can find them on Twitter. Follow me on my account. As I said, occasionally I publish more. And in any event, thank you very much for participating in our game. I hope you enjoyed yourself. Thank you very much.